Hello and welcome to Can We Still Be Friends, the podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss here with Ryan Ebling. In this episode, we're revisiting Garden State, a 2004 film written and directed by Zach Braff. The film follows Andrew Largeman, a depressed, struggling actor in his early 20s who goes back home to Jersey following the death of his mother. This film came out when we were in college, and though initially the film was well received by audiences, it has become the recipient of some brutal backlash.
Yeah, and for costing only $2.5 million to make, the film did well, pulling in over $35 million. It won an Independent Spirit Award for Best First Feature for Zach Braff, and its soundtrack is probably the most praised aspect of the film to date. However, the film was genuinely well received upon release by critics, and with many people praising Braff as a first-time director. It earned an 86% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which I was surprised to find, though on Metacritic, it's recently, over time it's fallen to 67. And for all its praise, we soon started seeing articles like Josh Levine's article on Slate.com called Why I Hate Zach Braff. And in 2011, while reviewing Braff's first play for Vulture.com, theater critic Scott Brown couldn't help but review it through the lens of hating Garden State, calling it an emo simulacrum of actual human feeling and attacking, quote, his breezy use of modern anxiety as fashion accessory, his crypto jailbait flowers for Algernon girl-child love interest. Ouch.
So we wondered if this movie really deserves that hate. We remember at least tolerating this movie, but now both of us have joined the chorus of jeers, without anything about the movie really changing. Does this movie deserve to be thrown into the bottom of the infinite abyss, and Zach Braff along with it?
Or is Garden State a film that we should cherish as much as our Desert Storm trading cards? Force your headphones onto the ears of a complete stranger and listen on. It'll change your life, we swear.
What are you listening to?
The Shins. You know them?
No.
You gotta hear this one song. It'll change your life, I swear. Oh, I'm sorry. You have to, you gotta fill out your forms. Conundrum. Think you could, maybe listen while you could?
I can handle it.
Yeah? Okay.
Gold teeth and a curse for this town.
That song, of course, from the pivotal moment in Garden State when Andrew Largeman's life is changed by listening to the Shins.
I know it's not probably popular to admit it, that was my first exposure to the Shins. So
I'm trying to, I don't remember if it was. It was right around that time.
Yeah.
It was for me. But we're going to talk about Garden State in a second. Before we do that, we want to talk about last episode, Hook.
yeah, well, heck, a lot's changed since then.
Yeah.
And so, as was mentioned at the beginning of the episode, if you listen to it, we had already picked that episode and rewatched and recorded everything.
Yeah.
2 day. We recorded it 2 days before we had got the news about Robin Williams' death. So
Yeah. It probably would have been a very different podcast if we had watched it and recorded it after the death. But after the episode, we got some good feedback from you guys, but all sort of through the lens of Robin Williams' death. And for me, and I think for a lot of you, the movie reinforced its significance in light of his death and the impact he had on so many people's childhoods through that movie specifically, but beyond every movie.
Right. Well, I think what I found interesting was, well, first of all, I think that it was great to hear so many people doing sort of memorial type of episodes or memorial write-ups on Robin Williams, because it just made me remember how much I really liked Robin Williams as a performer and an actor. And
the depth of his talent was
and
astounding.
Not all of his material was great, and everyone seems to need to mention that. And but you know, the good stuff rose above all of that, and he just seemed like such a, and the more you heard about just him even in real life, he seemed like a warm guy, and you know, just a lot of great things to say about him. But it did seem weird though that, you know, we really seem to have a ton of love for, in particular, the movie Hook, not only before the podcast, but during, after, all the feedback for our particular audience, I don't know if it's just a very, very small segment of the population. It is, but it just seems like there's such a weird dichotomy between, the people who really do love this movie and the entire critical world at large. I mean, I listened to so many, at least 3 different podcast episodes from podcasts I love, doing their tribute to Robin Williams, not a single mention of Hook. And yet when I went on Twitter or when I went on Facebook, so many people, when they listed off the movies that were most memorable of Williams, to them, it was Mrs. Doubtfire and Hook.
Well, I think what's key is that the people I saw doing that were people our age and younger. And I would not say most, I would say without a doubt, Hook or Mrs. Doubtfire were mentioned by people of that age range.
And I can say that Hook in particular struck that chord because Williams was in other children's movies. He was in Flubber, he was in Jumanji. I didn't hear hardly a thing about those movies, if anything at all. But Hook was one that came up over and over again when I was reading through all the different people remembering Robin Williams.
But yeah, I mean, we didn't get a lot of feedback beyond just how much it meant to people. Nobody really elaborated on anything. I don't think there was any need to. I mean, Hook, for us, it held up. For you guys, it seems like it held up.
Yeah, we didn't get a lot of people saying you guys are crazy, you're out of left field. But we did get some really good, just interesting insights from our website. One of which was that really struck me that I can't believe I didn't think to. It didn't cross my mind when I watched it. Is we had a commenter say that there's something in Hook that I think he remembered as a child, where you're sort of watching it with your own filter of your own father as you're watching it. You're kind of stacking your own father up against Peter Banning and Hook, or not Hook, but Peter Pan. Peter Banning as he becomes Peter Pan. And
which is my dad more like?
Which one is my dad? Is he the more Pan or is he the more Peter Banning? And I thought that was really interesting because I do remember watching it and thinking about my own father and thinking about how he fit in with that, which is a really interesting angle to take, remembering that about yourself as a child watching it.
Yeah. And I'm sure, I mean, I'm not a father, but you are. And I wonder if now you'll sort of consider, are you being
Am I Banning or am I Pan? Am I Pan the man? Yeah. We also had one of our listeners actually give us a call and leave a message about watching Hook with his kids after William's death. And so let's listen to that really quick.
Gentlemen, this is Andrew Johnson, also known to both of you as AJ. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your podcast and all the things that you have covered. I thought your Hook episode was particularly amazing. I am a father of 3 kids, 5.5, 3.5, and 1.5. All 3 children sat down and watched Hook. They laughed at all the right parts. They giggled. Like they knew where they were supposed to laugh. And furthermore, I didn't even realize it was as long as it was, but they didn't either. They actually sat entertained through the whole thing, even more focused than they do with shorter episodes that they watch on TV. So.
All right, well, there you have it. You have at least one father out there who was able to show Hook to their kids, and the kids thoroughly enjoyed it still. It still held up. Thank you very much, AJ, for your phone call. There was more to that phone call, but we actually cut it a little bit short.
All right, we love hearing from you guys. You guys have been commenting on some older episodes, and we love reading that. We love responding to you guys. We can't necessarily talk about them on the air because
we got to move on.
Just keep talking about old episodes. But we do
yeah.
love, as you guys are finding the podcast and listening to back episodes, we really do appreciate your comments.
There's always email feedback at canwestillbefriends.net. Always comment on the actual episode itself on our website, canwestillbefriends.net, and there is our phone number as well, which you can find on our website, and you can call in. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and jump into what we actually are all here for, which is a discussion of and a rewatch of 2004's Garden State. Now, if you haven't rewatched it since... It's actually celebrating its 10-year anniversary this year, which is kind of crazy. I mean, we're just getting old, but
yeah, we are. That was college. Anyway.
That was college, yeah.
But at the same time, Zach Braff has a new movie out called "Wish I Was Here."
Right.
And one of our listeners commented that she called it a sequel, which is interesting because I don't think technically it's a sequel, but it's about an actor who has grown up and is now successful, and his father dies, and he's going back home to deal with that.
So yeah, I guess a yin and yang kind of thing, maybe. But now it's a father, but then it was a mother.
A rehash. I don't know. But it's thematically probably a sequel.
Yeah,
and
he hasn't
officially.
really done much since.
Not writing or directing. No.
Right. So I mean, it does seem it's his follow up, whether you call it a sequel or not. It's
exactly
in that regard, it's a follow up. So we're talking about, this is 10 years ago. We have to remember back that far.
Yeah. I was 19.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about, though, what our initial feelings or experience was watching Garden State for the first time. This was 2004.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I saw this movie in theaters when I was in college. There was quite a bit of buzz about it. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's the only reason I saw it was because of the buzz.
The buzz, yeah.
I mean, I don't think I had even thought much about it until it seemed like I had to see it.
Yeah, and I wasn't a Scrubs fan, so Zach Braff didn't draw me.
I hadn't even watched an episode of Scrubs.
No, me neither. Maybe I had, but I don't. I mean, I still am not a Scrubs fan.
I don't think we really got TV in our dorm room.
No, we didn't.
So
that's true.
It had come on once I started college, and I never really caught up with it. So
I was 19 when I saw it, and I really did like it. And I think a lot of people don't remember liking it. I think more people like it than are willing to admit it back when they saw it.
Yeah, I could see that. The memory right now is mostly just about the hype.
Yeah. And for me, honestly, I had to kind of dig into my memory to remember liking it. But I did. I really did like it. Whether that's supposed to be embarrassing to admit or not.
What did you like about it when you saw it?
I got the appeal that the buzz was creating, and I thought it was arty, interesting. I thought it was funny at the time, and the soundtrack for me, I listened to it a lot, and I may have performed Such Great Heights at a coffee shop.
Okay,
and I genuinely don't remember.
I thinking it's a sign that the freckles
But I remember wanting to, but then the backlash, I think, had already started.
Oh, so you knew this was not a smart move.
Right. So I don't know what won out, my like for the song or my fear of what people would think of me. But when the backlash begun, and it happened pretty early, I got into that too. I bought into that hype, and it took very little to convince me that this wasn't a movie I should like, I'm sad to say.
Yeah, I think we should dig into that a lot later.
I think we will.
We really need to dig into that, how that happens.
Yeah, and I was a major elitist and a reactionist, and I was easily moved wherever the wind wasn't moving the general public. I watched the movie a couple more times after seeing it in the theaters. I actually bought it. I own the movie.
Okay.
And I began to get tired of it. I don't know if that was because I genuinely was getting tired of it, or I was weary of the popularity and that sort of thing.
Right.
Honestly, I probably haven't seen it in about 10 years.
So you think, so you actually saw it, but then you bought it. How many times did you actually watch it after you bought it?
Honestly, I think once.
Okay. So it's not one of those that, even though you own it, probably sits on the shelf for the most part.
Yeah. That being said, I don't think that watching it. I didn't think that watching it again is going to make me like it much more. As I thought about it, I was remembering the characters as being very broad. The joke's not especially clever. I remember the drama being really contrived and sophomoric, and the philosophical messages.
This is
of it.
all the. This is all in the backlash period you're talking about. This is not
in the time after, in the last 10 years, I'd say, since the last time I watched it. This
is all the lead up to
it's
our
rotted
rewatch,
in my memory. It's gotten worse in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I before I saw it, I was thinking I don't think the movie would hold up to scrutiny very well. And it's going to be interesting. This is one of my main points about after rewatching it. But right before I put it in, I was thinking, I wonder if this movie is supposed to hold up to scrutiny. So we'll get into that.
Well, let's talk about that
how about
in
you?
a bit. Yeah. For me, I was in college, like you. And we went to the same college, so there was obviously hype going on this campus like crazy. So
I don't think it was campus hype that I saw based on. I was watching like featurettes, and
I think it was my peer group on the campus.
Oh,
like my circle of friends. Everyone had kind of seen it except for me.
Oh, yeah.
It was kind of like, you should go see this movie.
Yeah, I was
it's a
one
really
of the
good
first
movie.
people to see it.
Oh,
so.
Wow. You had hipster cred that you then had to pretend you didn't have.
Yes, yeah.
So I had my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. We decided to have a movie date night, and we decided we were going to go see Garden State. But we were dating at the time, and as things go with dating, when you're in a movie theater with your significant other, I don't remember a whole lot about the movie. There were other things on my mind, and the movie itself the movie itself I was having a hard time connecting with, and I think I had just tuned out about a halfway into it. So I left the theater thinking to myself, this is a movie that I can see why a lot of my friends really like it. I don't think I'm above that at all. It's probably a decent movie. It just didn't, it was kind of wrong mood, wrong time kind of thing for me. And then I never really revisited it ever again. So
wait, the last time you saw it was this preoccupied time in the theater?
Yeah. It was, yeah.
And you feel okay saying you didn't like it?
Well, I think if it had been something that had grabbed my attention right away and that had really kind of pulled me in, we did watch movies when we went on our date nights. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for my wife now if she listens to this. But when we went to go see movies, we did watch.
There were times that the movie held both your attention enough that you could curb your interests.
Yes.
So it's the movie's fault you didn't pay enough attention.
We'll get to our poll in a bit, but there was a section on the poll where there was just an ambivalent option on it.
Yeah, is there was making out through the time I saw it option?
I didn't say we were making out.
You didn't say that. No.
I just think that my mind had wandered is all. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
All right.
But I knew that I didn't want to say anything too negative about it because this to me was like...
Because you didn't want to admit why you don't remember the movie.
Moving on. What I'm trying to say is that I do feel like from just a college cultural standpoint that this was a movie that was part of this sort of holy trinity of film discovery during college in the 2000s, where it was basically Donnie Darko, Eternal Sunshine, and Garden State.
That is such a funny list because Eternal Sunshine for me is the only one that really holds up.
Oh,
Donnie
at the time it felt like no dorm room was complete without them.
Yeah.
And I should say no sensitive white male's dorm room. But
yeah.
Those three were kind of like, and I actually really, even at the time and following, I don't know about so much now, but all the way for a long time, those other two movies I really liked and actually loved. So I felt weird kind of smashing or, really critiquing Garden State all that much just because I didn't get into it. I was like, well, eventually someday I will give it another chance. And that someday never happened. And as the backlash started growing, I just saw less and less of a reason to ever revisit it. Why revisit it? But I will say everyone had the soundtrack, and I did love the soundtrack. I thought the soundtrack was great, and I listened to that way more than I ever watched the movie. So they had that going for it.
That's true.
Why don't we go ahead and start talking a little bit about what our listeners had to say about Garden State, where we asked them to weigh in before we recorded this episode. We did have a poll.
Yes.
Let's talk about the results of that poll. We asked you to weigh in on how you actually felt about Garden State, and we asked you to be honest. So your options were that it changed my life, and I still love it. I loved it at the time, but now I'm not so sure. Ambivalent, meaning... whatever.
You just didn't really like it, or you were making out when you saw it.
That's kind of a catch-all umbrella term for anything not fitting these other ones.
I fell asleep watching it.
And then the last choice was never liked it in the first place. So with only 10% of the vote, we had never liked it in the first place. So there really wasn't, I think it goes along with that certified fresh rating and with these overall positive Metacritic scores that there really, at the time, wasn't a ton of hate for this movie.
Right.
It's the lowest of our poll. Like the fewest responses were that they hated it all along.
Yeah.
And then actually right above that at 16.6%, we had the complete opposite, the other end of the spectrum. It changed my life and I still love it.
Yeah.
So this is a little over 16% of people who loved it at the time and have actually watched it since then and think it still holds up.
Yeah.
And then we had at 23.3%. Loved it at the time, but now I'm not so sure.
And that's the one I picked.
That was you?
Yep.
And this is before the rewatch?
Yes, yes, yes. Always.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah, same here. I
That's
always
what I
vote
do.
before the rewatch. Yeah. And then we had, as if it wasn't obvious already, where I was standing on this. Actually, I think I said it earlier, but 50%, though, half of our respondents said
big.
that they were ambivalent about this movie, and I'm interpreting that as ambivalent at the time and ambivalent now. Like they just whatever. It's a movie that was there. Some people liked it, some people didn't.
It's interesting.
Whatever.
Yeah, I'm surprised at that number, but I mean, given our comments, we got pretty much the same thing. People, again, I guess I'm surprised. I thought more people liked this. I remember more people liking it than people who say they didn't really like it at the time. But a lot of people like Steven and Dan, two of our listeners, said that Steven said he remembers feeling uncomfortable with how much he liked it because it fit into a zeitgeist that he felt like he was supposed to hate or at least be weirdly dismissive of. And he mentioned that a lot of the time he hears it come up is in the context of the manic pixie dream girl trope, which one of our listeners, Alex, pointed out. The creator of that term, Nathan Rabin, I think it was, has since regretted coming up with that.
What a claim to fame, though, huh?
Yeah. But it got out of hand for him. He wishes that he hadn't come up with that. But Dan agreed with Steven, saying he liked it, but he was uncomfortable liking it because it felt like his buttons were being very intentionally pressed.
I thought that was an interesting trend in our feedback, was that there was a part of the backlash had to do with this feeling that the movie knew what it was doing, exactly what it was doing, and that it was being marketed to you and packaged to you in a way that, and that was so obvious that you felt like you even if you did like it, you weren't supposed to.
Yeah. Which is so interesting and so psychologically telling of our generation that
I only want to like something if I'm
liking it on my terms. Yeah. If you make me like it, I don't like it. That's just, and that's something I wanted to talk about this movie, about how it really taps into the psyche of that generation. But Dan went on to say that he felt the music gave it an unfair edge, and I would even say that the pretty much universal love for Natalie Portman would fit into that. And Dan pointed that out too. He said he knew Natalie Portman's character was a trope, even though the name hadn't been created. But at that point, he liked her, but then he felt weird for liking her because she had been engineered to appeal. Another listener, Andrew, said that he pretty much liked the movie because of Natalie Portman.
Honest feedback.
The movie
Love it.
played on, from what we're hearing from our listeners, the movie played on exactly what we liked. At least men. This is all men at this point.
Yeah. Which is also something I was noticing, and I was glad that we did actually eventually have a few women chime in, because I was kind of worried that we were only going to have this viewpoint of a particular dudes. Yeah. This is how the dudes felt about Garden State. But we did have we had a commenter, Lizzie, that wrote in talking about how she just enjoyed the movie. Well, that some of the humor in it, really worked for her. And while I don't think she was necessarily saying that it was a perfect movie, and she was able to sort of point out some things that weren't perfect about it, she specifically said, when the movie comes to mind, I tend to think not as good as Wes Anderson and leave it at that. So not saying it's necessarily an amazing film, but still liking it.
Yeah, and that ambivalence is echoed. People would say, yeah, it was. Ethan, one of our listeners, said he wouldn't call it life-changing, but that it was a well-written script.
Sure.
The soundtrack, everybody likes the soundtrack. Nobody has anything bad to say about the soundtrack. And this listener Ethan said, all in all, a good film. So there's a lot of people who just, okay, that movie exists.
Yeah. Yeah. But I also think that we had one or two people chime in with what I think really could be packaged up as the way it is most commonly interpreted these days. We had Chris on in our Facebook page saying he summed up Garden State as plentiful quirk, minimal substance, a fantastic study on indie tropes.
Yeah, I saw in our commenters echoes of the popular backlash, but more level, saying just sort of like it's almost saying it's not as important or bad or good as the backlash deserves. Mm-hmm. That it's just kind of there.
Yeah. Well, then why don't we talk about our feeling, especially since we actually did rewatch it, and I would actually, no matter how you feel about the movie, rewatch this movie
Definitely.
so that we can talk. If you listen to this, you can sort of have that whole perspective, because it's an interesting perspective to have, to take something that was very popular 10 years ago and has since sort of tarnished, and take a look at it again.
I would say no matter what you think about it, rewatch it with an open mind, because it was very interesting for me to rewatch it.
Yeah.
It was, with Hook, we had a lot of listeners saying that they were afraid to rewatch Hook because of what it meant to their childhood. As I was watching Garden State, I found myself getting more and more fearful to keep watching it because it really took me back to 19, back to when I saw it, back to that time. Because as I was rewatching it, I realized what some of our listeners said. It really did speak to me. It really got me.
You realize now, looking back, that at that time it got to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say that brought on fear and trepidation because I don't think this is a very good movie.
Okay.
And the ways that I remember it getting me, I realized that it did get me, and those ways, those feelings, those thoughts, that sense of humor, that ethos is just sort of embarrassingly immature and half-formed. Now, I said that before I watched it, I wondered if it was a movie that was supposed to hold up to scrutiny. Because the movie does not hold up to scrutiny for me.
Okay.
There were things that I noted as I was watching it that are jokes or visual jokes, that, like, if you think about it for half a second, you're like, well, that wouldn't happen. Like when he walks by the faucets and they all turn on.
Yeah.
Like, motion sensor faucets don't do that. Like, is his shirt made of wallpaper in the scene that he's standing there?
What kind of interior decorator is this
covered in fabric?
That figures, I'm going to make this bathroom wall out of...
Yeah. And, like, I'm pretty sure medieval times employees don't wear their armor home.
Right, because how would you drive there?
And no seeing eye dog would ever hump a leg. Like, just all these things that are jokes in the movie that, like...
That's a good point.
You laugh at, but then you're like, that wouldn't happen.
Right.
And I almost feel like, no, it wouldn't, but so what? And I remember in college, somebody posted on Facebook, like, sometimes the world sucks. And people were like, what's wrong? Oh, I hope you're feeling okay. Is everything all right? And then, like, an hour later, after like 50 comments of sympathy, this person's like, sometimes I wish I could post something on Facebook and people didn't have to comment about it.
FML. Add that on there too.
Yeah. And so this movie is that.
Okay.
It is the people who were in college when Facebook came out. It's that like, I want to scream into the void and be heard, but don't say anything about it.
Yeah.
And so for me, this movie is annoying because that's really annoying. Like, I rolled my eyes 70 times when I read that person's Facebook thing, but it's also so true. That is what we were like back then. Like, that is the general idea.
Do you think the movie is true, as far as being sort of honest about life and things like that? Or do you think that it's just coming from a true place? Like Zach Braff, as the writer-director, he really felt this movie. But do you think the movie is honest?
I do.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if the movie knows it's being honest.
Okay.
is the thing. Because if he knew what he looked like, I don't know if he would have put it out there like this. Because it's reading your journal out loud.
Oh, yeah.
It's just that it's for lack of a better word, mortifying, the idea that, like, this is how we felt. This is what we thought was funny. This is what we thought was moving. This is the kind of girl we thought we wanted to marry. This is the kind of guy we thought was interesting.
Right.
But we did. A lot of us.
In a way, it kind of, in what you're saying, reminds me of this documentary, which is streaming on Netflix. You should check it out. It's called Mortified Nation, which is about that exact thing of where people actually dig up their old diaries and journals and read them in public as a way, but it's for laughs. Like it's a way of sort of this cathartic way of laughing in unison about the silly ways we are when we're young.
Yeah.
And could this just be Zach Braff's contribution to Mortified Nation?
I think that's how I was seeing it, because I was honestly thinking this was the movie that I would have written if I could have when I was 19.
Right.
Because, I mean, not to minimize my history of depression, but there were times where in that depression, as I was trying to explore it or express it, I would just be like embarrassingly maudlin or embarrassingly like philosophical.
Right.
Which this movie is.
I've got full notebooks of poetry I wrote freshman year I pulled out about a year ago, and I was literally ready to burn it. And then I was just like, I just can't, it's a part of me. It's who I was, And so with that said, if you really, okay, this is what I was thinking to myself actually. And I think we can get deeper into my personal feelings rewatching this, because I had a lot of opinions rewatching this. I think I'm kind of on the same page as you for the most part. But aside from the movie, put the movie aside, I don't know that Zach Braff deserves the backlash that he's gotten, because I don't have to love everyone's realized pet project, their own personal thing, but I do think I tend to, and I think you should be a little bit more charitable towards films that are realized simply through an artist's dedication to their vision. Like he put it all out there. This is a very personal film. I got to give credit for that, because I don't think I could do it.
No.
To not only actually create something like this, but to believe in it so much, to get it made, to do it the way you do it. And I did watch. There are some special features on the DVD that I watched, and everyone again and again. The only constant that I noticed in these special features was that Zach Braff is very clear about his vision. He knows exactly what he wants because it's such a personal project for him. And that the producer stood by him on that and basically let him do what he wanted to do. Now,
good for him.
That's the thing, is like, we have to be honest about the film's quality. We can't just say, well, he gave it his best shot, so I have to say it's a good movie. I'm not saying that.
There are so many flaws with this movie.
Yes. I don't think I need to get too worked up about it or hyperbolic about this, but I just don't think it's a good movie. It's not a good movie. I'm sorry, Zach Braff. I think it's great that you did that you put everything into this. And one thing I'm thinking about the backlash in particular is, I wonder if that's more just because of what happened after, and he just didn't really do anything. It allowed for there to be just this buildup. Because honestly, for a premiere film as a writer and director, it's not shabby.
No. It's,
I kind of am thinking to myself, if he would have just kept on putting out movies every few years, maybe getting a little bit better here and there, because I can see things in Garden State that are worthy, that are things that we can respect, and that you can see promise in them.
Yeah.
I think there is promise in this movie, but it was never followed up with anything.
Yeah.
And when you don't do that, when you have something that shows off a little bit of promise and even gets a little bit of buzz, and people are charitable towards to it because of the buzz, but then you don't do anything really afterwards to follow it up.
Right.
This is bound to happen. It was going to happen when you do that.
Well, he really did go for it. In the directing, there are references to so many things, or homages, or ripoffs, or imitations, but they're really purposeless. Like, I remember early in the movie, after the funeral, when it's in his dad's house, and people are just sitting around talking, like, it goes from pretty traditional, back and forth, the conversation between him and Peter Sarsgaard, and then the next scene starts with like a waiter or somebody walking, and the camera kind of follows, and then the camera's handheld, moving around the party, and comes in on them for no reason other than people have done that, and that looked cool in this one movie, so I really want to try that. Later in the movie, where there's Method Man is talking to Peter Sarsgaard about how they get to the boat in the abyss.
Yeah.
The dialogue from the scene is kept, and then the images from the next scene go on. And that's been done in other movies for a reason. And here it was just a cool thing people have done before. And it just felt like I said, the movie I would have made when I was 19, because it's a very influenced movie.
It's and it is, whether it's purposeless or not, it's well composed as far as like these shots are done well.
Yeah.
And there's intention as far as just wanting to kind of create some kind of
cinematic quality.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's there. And that's what I'm saying, is that the directorial things, it shows an immature kind of filmmaking, but again, it shows a spark of something. Like
somebody doing something.
If he could have polished up the script, not a little bit, a lot, but he could have just learned how to harness what he appreciated about compositional shots. I mean, the way that there is an attention to what's filling the frame here. And if he could have harnessed both of those things later on into some movies, who knows what could have happened.
It's great that he was around producers who were willing to give him free rein to exercise his vision. But I really think this movie would have benefited from a director, from a Zach Braff script directed by somebody else, because it seems clear that he didn't know how to direct actors at this point. Whether he's gotten better, I don't know, because Natalie Portman's performance is terrible.
Oh, that character is terrible.
Yeah, it's if you haven't rewatched it, it's awful. However, in the end, she's better. It's just we can talk more about that.
But, maybe she gets better, but the movie gets more terrible as it goes on. So
you think so?
Oh my god,
parts of it do. Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Oh, it gets so bad.
Well, it starts bad. Like I was surprised.
I don't want. Okay.
Unsubtle this movie was, like when it opens with him laying in his bed and everything in the room is white.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh,
and that was almost confusing, because I had remembered so little about this film that it looked so white that I kind of had to try to remember if he was in
an institution.
Yeah. And I guess that's the point he's trying to make, but it was
society put him in an institution.
Yeah, but it got so unsubtle that it just actually ended up giving the wrong message.
Yeah, and
I think at the beginning, though, I was willing to go with it, and actually, it was when they introduced the Natalie Portman character that
her first scene is horrible.
Oh my gosh, it's the definition of that pic. I mean, you can't get any more obvious. The sound isolating headphones, the giggling, the little chuckling, with the curly braided kind of hair, and the.
Got any suggestions?
What?
You got any suggestions?
Yeah, kick his balls.
But her performance, aside from the character and how badly it's written, her performance is bad. It's bad.
Do you think it's bad, or do you think it's just that the character's bad?
I think her performance of a bad character is bad.
Okay.
I think that there were ways that she could have done this that it wouldn't have been so insane. But that character's insane. Like I was watching and I'm like, there are so many red flags about this person to get away from her.
That. Yeah.
Why is she appealing? Why was she appealing? And that's the thing.
And that's
because
scary to me that she was appealing.
She was. And that's why I have, as much as I'm railing against this movie, I have tremendous amount of charity towards it, because I did find her appealing. So many people found her appealing.
I never did. I really never. I swear,
never, ever.
Not in this movie. I really like Natalie Portman. In fact, I actually wrote down in my notes, what a waste of talent, because then she went on to do Closer. And then she went on to,
very soon after that.
And then obviously Black Swan, which got her the award, the Academy Award. But
that one award.
The one, I don't know which one of them. Some film thing.
Some statue piece.
A Book-It prize, maybe.
A Book-It, yeah. Jeez.
But especially in Closer, I feel like she kind of is almost destroying the character that she had done in Garden State, because it opens up even with the Damien Rice song and her kind of having this mystique about her, and the whole movie. It's been a long time since I've seen Closer, but it's basically showing like that character was kind of insane. Do you want to know what that really looks like in real life? Here, watch Closer. You know, And as much as this movie was trying to be The Graduate, she finally got a chance to actually work with
Mike
Nichols
Yeah.
on Closer and do something that Mike Nichols can do, which is create something that still well, Closer's not like this, but The Graduate still has that little bit of quirkiness,
Yeah.
that dry sense of humor, and still be such a more solid and meaningful movie.
Well, again, I it's interesting that you say what a waste of talent, because obviously Natalie Portman has shown she's talented. Whether or not, I think that Garden State shows that she needs a director too, because Closer was Mike Nichols, like we said. Black Swan was Darren Aronofsky.
Right.
I think that, especially at this point in her career, she didn't have her footing enough to carry the character. And this character needed a lot of carrying.
Oh my, yeah.
I do think, though, as the character went on, for some reason it softened. I think that might be bad writing. I just think later on, because for me, and maybe it's not this for you. For me, she wasn't so grating the whole time.
I think she actually tames down the pixiness a little bit later on. Maybe, I don't know. But what happens in the movie, the actual plot itself, is so disappointing and so terrible. I mean, not terrible as in like tragedy, but just it was so grating what was happening even on the screen. I mean,
that she became less grating, but the movie itself became more
exactly.
grating.
You're saying it better than I am.
I usually do.
This movie it's just bad melodrama painted over with a standout soundtrack. That's what this movie is. I mean, okay. I hate to do this. I'm going to bring Scott Pilgrim back up for a second.
Okay.
I think this movie actually helped me clarify a little bit more about what kind of drove me a little bit crazy about Scott Pilgrim. And I don't mean to bring that conversation back up again. It doesn't need to be rehashed. But they're similar in the sense that the protagonist is a passive, aimless 20-something. And that they are changed by an encounter with an unpredictable woman. And that woman helps them discover something meaningful about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think what I find it's so disappointing about using this traditional romance plot is that it fails to acknowledge the facade that defines infatuation. That's fine in movies like traditional romantic comedies, traditional romances. You know what you're getting into. But the thing is, I don't mean to be a curmudgeon, but in both movies, neither of those couples stand a chance beyond the butterflies, in my opinion. And then what happens is the Hollywood trope lives on, leaving these unrealistic expectations that get implanted into 20-somethings, okay?
Yep.
They get implanted in their minds that someday their pixie girl will come and all will be perfect, okay? I expect these in traditional romances, like I said, but hell, even in Titanic, it escaped this by making Leonardo DiCaprio die.
Yeah.
You know? I always hope that with, like, especially with Garden State, this is sort of this romantic dramedy, that they'll aspire to be something more. But I find their portrayal of love to be not only inaccurate, but cliche. I mean, and the whole reason I'm talking about this is if you compare this to something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind or The Graduate, in Eternal Sunshine, the actual maturing point is the acceptance of the romance's pitfalls.
Yeah.
And because of that, he discovers a love that is informed by the shortcomings of the partner.
Yeah.
You know? Or in The Graduate, you take The Graduate, the single defining clip in The Graduate, that last clip where it lingers on them as they realize that they've come back for each other, but then the camera makes you say, now what?
Yeah.
That's good writing. That's a good movie that makes you, it stretches you. This is terrible because it's not only cliche in this stupid airport scene, you know, where how cliche do you have to get where you're running through an airport back to your girl? But then it just leaves like that. It basically just says, I'm messed up, you're messed up, but we're going to keep on. I don't even, you know, but
this time it's different.
This time it's different. Yeah.
Look, do you remember that idea I had about working stuff out on my own and then finding it once I figured stuff out?
Ellipsis?
Yeah, ellipsis. It's dumb. It's dumb. It's an awful idea, and I'm not gonna do it, okay? Because like you said, this is it. This is life. And I'm in love with you, Samantha. I think that's the only thing I've ever been really sure of in my entire life. I'm really messed up right now, and I got a whole lot of stuff I gotta work out, but I don't want to waste any more of my life without you in it, okay?
Yeah.
And I think I can do this. I mean, I want to. I mean, we have to, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And I was also
bad.
I was also struck this time at how boring that shot is, that final shot of them hugging in the empty baggage return.
You got the what is it, Fro or Frau song
Frou
going,
Frou.
and that kind of helps a little bit. But
You think so? I don't. I guess I never really liked Frou Frou.
that one song I liked. And that
I
was
didn't really, but that's fine. You can like it.
That can be our next podcast episode.
Yeah. Let Go by Frou Frou. Tell us what you think. And I think you're right. I think absolutely this movie set us up to think that a crazy Natalie Portman would be crazy enough to not be with somebody, but sane enough to pull it together when they met us.
And he's not stable either.
Right.
It's a terrible combination.
And here's the thing. That disillusion was going to come whether Garden State existed or not. Most of us were able to avoid ever having that belief because we stayed away from How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days and like the romantic comedies. This was a romantic comedy for us, for the hipster elite.
Good point.
Indie music. And we have never been forced into disillusion. We were the owners of our disillusion.
Mm-hmm.
We were disillusioned before anybody got disillusioned. And so now Zach Braff had the audacity to give us hope.
Yeah.
And he has become the scapegoat for our disillusion. I don't think he did anything wrong except for be in the wrong place at the wrong time and try to bring a genre that none of us ever would have given a second thought to into our lives. And he brought it, and we believed it, and we hate him for it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And I think that for all the movie's faults and the really simple and obvious philosophy of it and the lessons learned, for me at 19, it was exactly what I needed to hear. And I feel like I've said this a few times, that a movie speaks to you at a certain time, and it's supposed to speak to you at that time, and it may not necessarily speak to you later. And one of the simple and obvious messages to adults is the one where he says, you know, when you come back home and it's strange because you've been away and home doesn't feel like home anymore.
That is the best line in the movie.
Now as adults, we're kind of like, yeah. At 19, I was still learning that.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
It is different. And I was just discovering that for myself. This movie really spoke to me, and I personally was dealing with the meds and the cryless fog that they put me in. I think 3 years I went without crying. So that personally spoke to me. There was a lot there about the over-medicating of our 20-somethings.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rewatching it makes me really thankful I'm not in that same place mentally, and that I've grown up to the point where I've created a home with my wife, a home that if I have kids, they won't recognize when they come back. And Garden State, it was a movie of its time, probably so much so that it was a movie of its week. The thoughts and the feelings that this movie remind me of seem fleeting in hindsight, like not even worth mentioning, because they honestly were maybe 2 or 3 years of my life. But at the moment, they were everything. I hadn't experienced anything beyond it.
Yeah.
And Braff is depicting a time in life of experimentation, not just as the movie really clumsily shows, experimentation with drugs and sex.
That's a great song, though.
Yes.
The 07 in the waiting line song. Great song.
But that scene is so clumsy and so referential.
Again,
that it was
painted over
awful.
with a great soundtrack.
Yeah. But experimentation with new emotions and new philosophies and new mindsets. And he happens to have gotten unlucky enough to have his experimentational thoughts, philosophies, and emotions preserved on film. I was fortunate enough to scribble them in discarded notebooks, ponder them on late night Wendy's runs, and blabber them to patient friends who hopefully have forgotten some of the dumb stuff I said as a 19-year-old.
Right. He doesn't get that luxury. Yeah.
He doesn't. He has to live with it, and we all have to blame him for thinking it, even though we all thought.
Right.
And there's a time to hear simple platitudes and have them carry significance. And that time is the first time you hear it. And I cannot fault it for telling me what I needed at the time.
Okay, question for you. Do you think a 19-year-old of today is going to have that experience with Garden State.
Probably not, because I said,
yeah.
it was so specific. It was so specific to that time of medication, the Zoloft that he was on. Do you remember all the Zoloft commercials?
Oh yeah.
When we were in high school and college, like it's so specific. And the thing is, maybe it would have taken an older, more experienced writer with some perspective to really address the things of the time. But I honestly think that Garden State and movies like it that will happen in the future are important for really just capturing that time and being something to people then.
I mean, I guess you don't fault it for doing what it did at the time. I don't know. I kind of feel like I was reading some reviews at the time, and I remember Keith Phipps in AV Club. I love his last line in his review where he said, "It's all well and good to have a character rediscover hope in the midst of death, but having him literally howl in defiance at the abyss probably qualifies as excessive."
Yeah, this movie was
like,
on
I don't
the
have any
nose
beef
in a
with
lot of
what
weird
he's
ways.
with what's happening. It's just how it's done. And there's this scene that's
agree.
so terrible where the guy he's kind of living in this boat and and
I think I know what you're gonna say.
Hey, Albert! Yeah? Good luck exploring the infinite abyss. Thank you. Hey! You too.
We might play the audio for you, but it's visually what is happening is what's so silly about it is Zach Braff, they leave the boat and the guy's about to close the door and Zach Braff says, "Hey," and the guy comes back out and then the camera goes back to Zach Braff and he says, "Good luck exploring the infinite abyss." And then the camera goes to the guy and he goes, "Thanks."
Yeah.
And then Zach Braff starts to walk off and the guy goes, and the camera shows the guy and the guy goes, "Hey." And the camera shows Zach Braff stopping, walking off screen to turn back. And the guy goes, camera back on the guy, "You too."
Right.
And then Zach Braff points his face toward the heavens, which is pouring rain, and shakes his hair. It is so bad.
I half expected to see a sweaty jersey being thrown from from the guy on the boat to Zach Braff's Andrew character.
A lot of people said it felt like it was pushing their buttons. I don't think Zach Braff was being pandering. I think he was being sincere.
I think he was totally sincere
about what he was doing.
Yeah. Now I think
maybe
Fox
the
Searchlight
studio saw that they were pushing
Fox
buttons.
Searchlight saw that and said, "We can make a lot of money selling this to people just like Zach Braff."
Yeah.
And they bought it at the Sundance Festival with that in mind. But that doesn't, you can't hold Zach Braff, you can't hold him accountable for that. He made the movie he wanted to make, and it's not really his fault if the studio took that and marketed it in the way that totally did give you that feeling that you were being marketed to.
Right. And here's the thing. I think, like I said, it's very sincere and earnest. It's just very sincere and earnest about pretty immature and basic things. And that's what makes it sort of silly.
And that's like, I come back to what I was saying is I think that's what's most disappointing is we never saw him make something after he had kind of, I wonder what he even feels about this movie at this point. Like if he were being honest with himself, like,
because I think he should be proud of it.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. It's not a shabby movie for a directorial and writing debut.
Right.
It's a hell of a lot better than anything I would have come out with at that age.
Yeah.
You know?
That is exactly what I hoped would have come out of me at that age.
Yeah, exactly. And we haven't even talked about the soundtrack yet, which I do want to talk about. But
yeah,
that soundtrack was a new
such
thing.
A specifically curated soundtrack.
Absolutely. The playlistification of music.
Yes.
And this was the representation of that. I mean, this is a soundtrack that was made for your headphones and that was made where this was, you could feel that this was iTunes coming into itself, where people were just getting tons and tons and tons of new music, and it wasn't coming from the radio. And Zach Braff was, I'm sure, in that same situation, and he was able to create this great playlist. It deserved the Grammy that he won. He deserves that Grammy that he won.
I don't know about you, but I was making mixed CDs for everybody.
Yeah. That
was us at that time.
Yeah, it was me. And I whether I liked the movie at the time or whether I didn't doesn't matter for this point, which is that it was me. That was me.
And here's the thing. I think the backlash started because we realized it was us. We realized that us was a commodity that was being sold to us. We didn't like it, so we backlashed, which is so us.
Yeah.
To have backlash.
Yeah.
This movie is still us.
Yeah.
Because it is the self-loathing, self-deprecation of hating who we used to be and being embarrassed by it.
Right.
This movie continues to be of its moment.
So it sounds to me like our take on the movie is a little complicated.
Yeah.
Because we're not necessarily, like, if we had to rate this movie today, it would not get a good rating.
No.
But we're not necessarily saying that it doesn't have its place.
Right. Exactly.
So that's something we can do on a podcast, luckily.
Yeah. Nobody's holding us to some sort of rating. Yeah. Does it deserve the backlash? I think is sort of the big question.
Yeah. And I think what we're saying is
kind of.
it kind of does, but only in the sense that it was almost too accurate for its time and embarrassingly so.
It deserves backlash as much as we deserve backlash for whatever opinions we held when we were 19.
Sure. So I guess that's fair to say. And what we want to do now at this point is I think we've kind of exhausted what we've had to say about Garden State. And so we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to weigh in even further on your thoughts. If you did rewatch it kind of along with us, we'd love to hear your take on it this time around, because I'd like to know if we're kind of in the majority or the minority on our retake of this. So again, comment on Facebook, reply on Twitter, email us feedback at canwestillbefriends.net, or just comment on the episode on our website, canwestillbefriends.net. So, Ryan, do you want to tell us what we're going to be discussing in our next episode of Can We Still Be Friends?
I do want to tell you, Nate.
I'm all ears.
This is our first, not the first listener suggestion we've heard, but the first one that we're actually doing.
Gonna do.
And it's also the last one we got. This person called in earlier today, didn't leave their name, but they suggested we do the 1999 movie, American movie.
Documentary.
A documentary. It came out 15 years ago.
So this is actually also going to be our first documentary we've ever talked about.
Documentary. And now the reason we're watching it, aside from the fact that a listener suggested it, is that we haven't seen it in a long time.
Right.
And it's a movie that's held in pretty high regard. And we want to rewatch it for ourselves. I actually was telling Nate, I watched it the first time on the exact same day that I saw Being John Malkovich for the first time.
Which was our first episode.
Right.
So there's a lot of connections here.
A lot of reasons we're doing this one. Yeah, so I'm excited to watch it again.
I remember loving this movie, too. So in case you've never heard of American Movie, this is the documentary about Mark Borchardt from Wisconsin, your home state, who tries to the whole movie follows him as he tries to get his, which actually is a connection to Garden State a little bit. With Zach Braff. He tries to get his dream movie project off the ground, and the documentary follows the antics that follow throughout that.
And they are antics.
So beforehand, weigh in for us. We'll put up a post on our website so you can give us your thoughts beforehand if you've seen American Movie. Also, try to rewatch it before we come back and discuss it in our next episode. But we look forward to that. And thank you for listening to our discussion of Garden State.
And thanks for getting involved in the discussion before the episode.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, anyways, again, like always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, I just wanted to call in. My name is Thomas. I had a couple other comments about Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and I'll summarize them briefly instead of writing them out. One, I just thought you talked a lot about the niche for the gaming arcade crowd, but when it comes to the reason why that was used, you didn't really talk about it a whole lot. Like, why is that particularly appropriate for this story? And it is appropriate when you think about it, and I think that is a theme that could have been developed more. It's like, why was this format used? And clearly it has a lot to do with inner conflict, the wrestling, also the bravado of superheroes and kind of the lameness of winning a momentary fight, etc. Anyway, and also that, this is another way in which we can illustrate well what goes on emotionally. Like, we get knocked out whenever we break up. So, this is a much more clear and fantastic way to show what we're feeling. So it's appropriate. Anyway, the other thing is I just thought that, the movie begins like Romeo and Juliet. We want Michael Cera to be turned into a proper knight, but he doesn't, and it's kind of like a bait and switch. Like, you come in for the romance, but really it's not that, because he's not even enough of himself to be romantic. He's not mature enough to be himself. So in important ways, and y'all touched on this, the final triumph of his humility, owning up to all his business, past and present, is the superpower of adulthood. And so the fight is just a ruse at the end to make him feel like he's a superhero and he's going through it. But actually, the only way he wins is by dying. So when he stops fighting and basically owns up, that's when he wins. So I'm done with Scott Pilgrim. I'll just say that's all. Peace. Thanks for the reviews. They've been great. I especially like this last one on Hook. Peace.